When a person fulfills a mitzvah that screams out cruelty just because HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us to do so.
Welcome to Prism of Torah with Rebbe Saf Aaron Prisman, engaging Divrei Torah, packed with stories and practical insights. Find us wherever you get your podcasts or at prismoftorah.org.
Shalom Avrocha. In this week's Parshas Ki Seitzei, we know is packed with all kinds of mitzvos. However, there is two mitzvos that seem to have a very strong contrast between them, and that is the famous mitzvah of kibud avayim, honoring one's parents, which, as we know, the Gemara in Kiddushin says it is an extremely difficult mitzvah to fulfill appropriately, and we can understand why. And yet, the reward of this mitzvah is arichas yamim, long life. On the other hand, there's another mitzvah that the Gemara teaches us that this mitzvah is very easy to do for the simple reason that you don't have to lay out money for this mitzvah. There's no chisron kis, and that is shiluach haken, which means that we have a mitzvah, a very special mitzvah, has a lot of segulas to it, to chase away the mother bird before taking its young. And the reward also over there, it says leman yarichun yamecha, also arichas yamim. So the Gaon of Vilna asked the following question: how can it be that out of all the mitzvahs, the only two mitzvahs that have this reward of arichas yamim, long life, written in the Torah are these two? And I want to add another question, and that is, it seems a bit alarming that one mitzvah is so easy to do, and one is so difficult to do, and yet it seems like the reward is the same. So I think the textbook answer to the last question I just asked, and perhaps also the first question, is the Torah is telling you that it is not your role in this world to try to see, let's see, mitzvah number 101 has an amazing reward, so I'm going to do this mitzvah. And I'm going to make an effort to do this mitzvah more than a different mitzvah. No, as Chazal teach us, that is not what we're supposed to do in this world. We are supposed to run after mitzvahs because that is the tzeidah l'derech, that is the food for our soul, and that is what we're working on, and we don't try to figure out what the reward is. In fact, the Torah usually does not tell us what the reward is for a mitzvah because it's not based on the reward that we decide which mitzvah to do. We have to run after every mitzvah. In fact, we know that every mitzvah has a parallel limb in our body, and hence we're fixing that limb in its spiritual sense. And in the world to come, people will see, oh, you didn't fix this limb and you didn't fix that. Why? Because we didn't work our best on performing all the mitzvahs that we can. And therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Torah on purpose, went out of its way to show us that a mitzvah that seems to be very difficult and a mitzvah that seems to be very easy, they have the same reward to teach us this idea, this concept, that we do not do mitzvahs based on rewards. In fact, we can't even understand what the reward is for anything. So it's none of our business to decide and try to figure out what the reward is for each mitzvah. Ad kan, I think, is a standard mahalach of how to answer these two questions. However, the Gaonus of the Gaon of Vilna, in the Chumash called Chumash Agra, says an unbelievable word over here that I think is very important for all of us to learn, and I think it's a great time to know it now, during this time of Elul before Rosh Hashanah. He says, you know what the uniqueness of kibud avayim is? Kibud avayim, when you're coming and honoring and helping your parents, especially as they get older, that screams out, wow, you're being so nice. That's a merciful act, an act of rachmanus. On the other hand, shiluach haken, if you look at the overall picture, that's a maise achzarius. That is really cruel. You're pushing the mother bird away from its young. It's true that the Torah tells you that if you want the young, the best way to do it is to push the mother bird away because she doesn't see as you're taking the young away. However, in the overall sense of your action, it is a maise achzarius. You're being cruel, says the Gaon of Vilna. And he connects it to a pasuk in Tehillim, and he says, the way you see that a person has reached perfection to a certain degree, shleimus, that is when you see him performing two mitzvahs that he was commanded by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they have the opposite midah, meaning it's screaming out an opposite characteristic, because that shows he's really doing it for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that shows that even though it's not coming naturally to him, he's still doing it. Because a lot of people have a certain nature. Some have a nature of being merciful towards other people, and some have a nature of being a bit cruel. When a person fulfills a mitzvah that screams out cruelty, just because HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us to do so, so if you just saw that, you can say, okay, maybe that's his nature. It's easy for him to do it. But would he do the opposite? Would he do a merciful act? And when you see him doing also a merciful act that's a mitzvah, now you see that he's totally machnia himself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and does Ritzon Hashem. And vice versa. Meaning, a person has to strive to be Oved Hashem, not only when it's easy for him, and that's his nature anyways, but the opposite. He has to also work hard to go against his nature to do Ritzon Hashem. Sometimes to say no to someone is Ritzon Hashem. And if it's easy for you to say yes, but difficult for you to say no, you're not fulfilling your mission 100% in this world. You haven't reached shleimus. Where do we see this idea? In my opinion, also hinted in Chazal. We know Rashi and Chumash says to us, and it's also Gemara, they have to be Oved Hashem, Bechol, we say it in Kriyat Shema every day, Bechol Levavcha. It should have said Bechol Libcha. What's this extra base? It's redundant. Tell us Chazal, you have to be able to be Oved Hashem, Bishnei Yetzarecha. Also with Yetzer Tov, the good Yetzer Tov, and also with Yetzer Hara. Yetzer Tov, we know, is linked to, the association we have with Yetzer Tov is midot, character traits such as being merciful, being nice, and Yetzer Hara is more with the traits that are not so good usually, like being cruel. But all these things, sometimes we have to use them, and you have to know how to Oved Hashem with both, even though one is the opposite to the other. And that is what the Gaon of Vilna says, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is teaching us through these two mitzvahs. Both have the same reward, at least it's written that way in the Torah, to ensure we understand, yes, when did you reach shleimus? And perhaps that's why the reward is written as long life, arichas yamim, because that hints to shleimus, to be complete, when you're able to be Oved Hashem in one character trait, and also the opposite character trait. Because what's in common? Just the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was commanding us to do so. Where do we see this? So we spoke about this several years ago. We see this in Avraham Avinu. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Avraham Avinu, after he was willing to take away and shecht his own son, because Hashem commanded him, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, now I realize you're a true Oved Hashem. You're a Yareh Hashem. Atay yadati, now I see you're a true Yareh Hashem. What do you mean Atay yadati? Avraham Avinu, unbelievable. He did so much. Why only now was it screaming out that he's a true Oved Hashem? And the answer is, because until now he always did acts that showed how much he cared about other people, Hachnasas Orchim, he was very merciful, etc. But now he was doing something the opposite nature, perhaps even against his own nature. Maybe that he wouldn't be able to do in such a way, but Avraham Avinu showed, no, even to take my own son away with a cruel act. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you were mitzavah me, you commanded me, I put my head down and I listen to what you say, and I'll go against my nature to do Ritzon Hashem. The same is true with Lot. Lot was in Sodom. Hashem destructed all of Sodom, but Lot he saved. And Chazal tell us, why did he save Lot? Because when Avraham Avinu went to a certain place and to protect himself, he pretended his wife was his sister. He could have told on him and he didn't. The question begs itself, what do you mean? It's his family. He's going to tell on his family? Wow, that's crazy. On the other hand, it would have been very fitting that we simply say the reason he was saved is because he was amazing in doing chesed. When the angels came to visit his house in Sodom and pretend they were regular people, he did his best to ensure they get salt with their food because he wanted to be nice to them. That's chesed. Why don't we say he was saved because of his trait of chesed? And the answer is, chesed by him came easily because he grew up with Avraham Avinu. So he was nurtured by Avraham Avinu. Chesed was it became part of him. So that was easy for him to do. That was his second nature already. However, he had that nature of doing anything to get money, to get honor, and that he really had to fight off in order to not tell on Avraham Avinu that Sarah isn't really his sister but his wife. He would have gone so much for that. And yet he worked on himself to do Ritzon Hashem and did not tell on Avram and Sarah that they're actually husband and wife. And because of that, he did receive the reward of being saved. Obviously, the practical takeaway from this is a person has to do cheshbon nefesh, especially during this time of Elul before Rosh Hashanah. We have to see how are we acting? Are we just going with the flow, what's easy for us because it's our nature, and when it fits what the Torah tells us, okay, let's do it. Or are we also working on ourselves? That even though deep inside our hearts we know Ritzon Hashem is to do something that goes against our nature, we persevere, and despite the fact that it's very difficult for us, we'll still do Ritzon Hashem. I would like to end off with a story that I actually wanted to send out last week, because it's more fitting to see the vote we said last week about a Rav that's able to see it and dissect a certain situation in a way that we sometimes are unable to see. But you will see that what comes out of this story is something that can help us for this time of Elul. And the story goes like this. I saw this brought down by the Avas Torah. I don't know who he is, but I saw it brought down in a certain sefer over here that they have in my shul. And the story is as following. This was a rich person, a big gvir, and he took upon himself together with his wife to bring this yasom, an orphan, into their house. They took care of him. They brought him up. They gave him food. They gave him clothing. And as he got older, he wanted to give him a job. So he said, listen, I have to drive. In those days, it wasn't driving. It was with a carriage and horses, but we'll call it a driver nonetheless. And he told him, I want you to be my driver. I'm going to go now to a nice long business trip, and I would like you to be my driver. Tell me whatever amount you think is fair, I'll give you. And he said, not such a small amount of money, but he said, no problem. As they went from place to place one night, this orphan had a huge yetzirah that night, and he said, this is crazy. Why am I the driver? Why can I not be the businessman? And then he decided to wake up early that day, start dressing up with the clothes of the person that brought him up, the gvir, the rich person. And as this rich person woke up, he said, okay, let's go. He goes, what do you mean, let's go? You're the driver, and I'm saying, let's go. Get dressed, let's go. He goes, what do you mean? You're wearing my clothes. He said, no, these are my clothes. The gvir, the rich person, realized, whoa, I cannot believe this. This is the biggest nightmare. How did this happen to me? And so he had nothing to do. He was the driver, and they go to the next station, and the orphan, who looks like he's the gvir, he's the one in charge, stops next to the hotel, and he tells the hotel manager, okay, I need a great room, and my driver, he can sleep with the horses, it's good enough. After the orphan, who, as we said, looks like he's in charge over here, goes to sleep, the real person that's in charge, who doesn't seem to be in charge, this rich person, wanders the streets, and he can't believe what has happened to him. He sees someone that looks like he has a bit of wisdom, and he tells him, please, tell me, maybe you can help me. I don't know what to do. How did I get into this situation? What do you think I should do? He goes to him, don't worry, there's a big Rav in this town. I'm going to go to the Rav and I'll see what he can do. Open brackets, that's why this was fitting for last week's Dvar Torah. Close brackets. He goes to the Rav, and suddenly the Rav appears in the hotel. He calls both, and they have no choice because he was the big Rav of the city. He calls both the orphan and the balabais, the real rich person. And before he said anything, he suddenly screams out, driver! And of course, who jumps? The real driver, not the fake driver. The orphan. And he realized what was going on, and that was the end of the story, and he made him give him back the clothing, and everything went back to the way it should have been. So this story was fitting for last week because it shows that the Rav has a certain wisdom that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him to be able to dissect situations. However, the Avas Torah, or Avas Chaim, I don't remember what he's called, he says the following. Not only is this a true story, but it can also act as a parable. And I'm saying it can act as a parable for our time right now in Elul. A time that we recalibrate and see and ensure we're focused on what life is all about. Because our neshama is the one that's supposed to be in charge. It comes down over here, mitachat kisei hakavod, and we're over here as a means to go through a certain whatever tikkun we have to do, and we go through a path in life, and we're supposed to do good things and get fuel for our soul. And yes, the soul needs help. It needs a body to be able to live in and to use the body to do whatever it needs to do. Even eating can be a big mitzvah, and hence you need a body. But oy vavoy to us if what happens is our body becomes in charge, like this poor person, the yasom, decided to be in charge. What if our body suddenly lives here and he pretends to be in charge? Oy vey, that's going to be horrible for us. We have to ensure that the one's in charge is the one that should be in charge, which is really what defines us, the neshama, our soul, and not our body. Have a good Shabbos.
This concludes another episode of The Prism of Torah. Thank you for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something valuable. If you did, please subscribe to the podcast and give a 5-star rating. You can also find this podcast wherever you get your podcasts or our own website, prismoftorah.com, where we have a full archive of all our past episodes. We would like to thank Yona Vefa for the recording equipment and Eli Podcast Productions for handling all our post-podcast productions. Join us next week for another enlightening conversation on The Prism of Torah.